My son, a surgeon whose hands I once taught toady his own shoelaces, and his wife, a lawyer whose education I paid for, sat across from me with a folder. Inside was a choice. Sign over my $3.8 million home Theo and I built with his mother. Or they would have me declared mentally incompetent. They saw an old man, a problem to be managed. What they didn't see was the auditor. And I was about to conduct my final review. Before I tell you what was in the folder I prepared for them in return, I would love to know where you're listening to my story from. Tell me in the comments below. And please, hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that true strength isn't about how loud you can shout, but how long you can plan. The late Sunday afternoon sun was warm on my back. It was the kind of gentle September warmth that felt like a memory of summer. I was in the garden, on my knees, tending to the Carolina roses. They were her favorite, a deep velvety red with a scent that could fill the whole yard. Each bloom was a testament to the 30 years we'd spent in this house, turning soil, pulling weeds, building a life from nothing. The soil felt cool and honest in my hands. The world made sense out here, but then I heard a sound that didn't belong, the crunch of expensive tires on my gravel driveway. It was a sound of impatience, of assertion. I didn't need to look up to know whose car it was, a silver German sedan, the kind that cost more than the first house Caroline and I ever bought. I slowly got to my feet, wiping my hands on my trousers. Daniel and his wife, Amelia, were getting out of the car. They weren't dressed for a Sunday visit. Daniel wore a crisp polo shirt and tailored slacks, looking like he'd just left the country club. Amelia was in a sharp, dark pantsuit, her leather briefcase in hand, as if she'd come straight from a hostile negotiation. She was always dressed for battle. I just never thought the battle would be with me. "Dad," Daniel said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an announcement. There was no warmth in his voice, just a clinical assessment. "You shouldn't be doing that kind of work." "You could fall?" I've been gardening for 40 years, Daniel. "I think I know how to stand up," I replied, my voice flat. Amelia stepped forward, her heels sinking slightly into the soft lawn. She surveyed the property, her eyes not seeing the climbing roses or the ancient oak tree, but calculating square footage and property value. "Robert," she began, using my first name as she always did, a subtle power play to establish herself as an equal, not a daughter-in-law. "We need to talk about some logistical streamlining. We've been running the numbers, and the upkeep on a property this size for one person is, well, it's fiscally irresponsible." The words hung in the air between us, cold and sharp. Fiscally irresponsible. They had taken the sanctuary Caroline and I had built, introduced it to a line item on a spreadsheet. "The house is paid for, Amelia." "It has been for 20 years, I said, walking towards the stone patio. I didn't invite them in. Daniel followed, placing a hand on my shoulder. His touch felt proprietary, like a doctor examining a patient without their consent. "Dad, it's not just about the money. We've been worried. We've noticed a certain cognitive latency in our recent calls. It's about mitigating risk factors. At your age, living alone..." He let the sentence hang, the unspoken words, dementia, incompetence, helplessness, drifting in the air like poison. They were using their professions as weapons. She, the lawyer, spoke of assets. He, the doctor, spoke of ailments. Both of them were there to declare me obsolete. I looked at my son, at the man he had become. I saw the ghost of the little boy who used to help me in this very garden, his hands covered in mud, laughing as he tried to catch a worm. That boy was gone. In his place stood a stranger in expensive clothes, his face a mask of false concern. "Mom would have wanted you to be looked after," Daniel said, pressing his advantage. He gestured towards the rose bushes. "She wouldn't want you clinging to the past like this. It's not healthy. She would have wanted you to be practical." That was the first crack. The moment the ground gave way beneath me, using her memory, Caroline's memory, as a tool to get what he wanted. A cold fury, quiet and deep, began to solidify in my chest. For 5 years since she passed, I had endured the missed calls, the brief, the transactional visits, the subtle condescension. I had mistaken their neglect for busyness, their selfishness for ambition. I had been wrong. I finally looked them both in the eye. "What do you want?" Amelia's professional smile didn't reach her eyes. Daniel took a breath, as if preparing to deliver a difficult diagnosis. "We're moving in tomorrow, Dad," he said. "We've already arranged everything. We'll take the master suite upstairs, and you can have the guest room by the den. Amelia can manage the estate's finances, and I can keep a better eye on your health. It's for the best. For everyone." The world fell silent. The buzzing of the bees in the roses, the distant hum of a lawnmower, it all faded away. All I could hear was the echo of his words. "We're moving in tomorrow." Not a request. Not a discussion, a verdict. They had judged me, sentenced me, and were now here to execute the order. I let the silence stretch, watching them. They stood there expecting gratitude, or perhaps a token resistance they could easily overcome. They had planned for every contingency except one. They had forgotten who I was. My voice, when it came, was dangerously calm. "No one," I said, enunciating each word with precision, "is moving into this house. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. Daniel's mask of concern flickered, revealing a flash of raw frustration. Amelia's smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of cold, hard calculation. This was the part of the negotiation she understood. Hostility. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She calmly placed her briefcase on the glass patio table, the click of the latches echoing in the quiet yard. She opened it and produced a sleek, leather-bound folder. She was no longer a daughter-in-law. She was a litigator in her courtroom. I was hoping we could handle this amicably. "Robert," she said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing tone, "but we are prepared for this outcome." She slid the folder across the table towards me. "You may not be aware of the specifics of Massachusetts state law regarding conservatorship. When an individual is deemed incapable of managing their own significant assets, particularly when they are of an advanced age and show signs of what a medical professional might term diminished capacity, the family has a fiduciary duty to petition the probate court to appoint a guardian." Every word was a perfectly polished stone, thrown with intent to injure. "Daniel has colleagues," she continued, gesturing towards my son, who now stood with his arms crossed, a stern look on his face. "Respected physicians who would be willing to provide a professional assessment of your cognitive state for the court. It would be a messy public affair. Your finances, your health records, all of it would become part of the court record. We don't want that." "You don't want that." She opened the folder. Inside were 2 documents laid out side by side. "This," she said, tapping the first paper, "is a quitclaim deed. Your signature adds Daniel and me to the title of this house as joint owners. It's a simple, clean solution that protects the family's primary asset." Then her finger moved to the empty space next to it. "And this space," she said, her voice lecherous, "is where you prevent us from having to file the conservatorship petition on Monday morning. The choice is yours. Voluntary cooperation or legal intervention. Either way, the outcome is the same. We will be here to manage things. The ultimatum. Sign away my home, my independence, my dignity, or have it stripped from me in a courtroom where my own son would testify against my sanity." They had planned it all. The medical threat from him, the legal threat from her, a perfect, ruthless pincer movement designed to crush any resistance. They looked at me, their faces confident, certain of their victory. They saw a frail 72-year-old man, a gardener, a widower, a problem to be solved. I let the silence hang in the air for a full minute. I looked from Daniel's arrogant face to Amelia's predatory eyes. I looked at the papers that were meant to be the end of my life as I knew it. And then I did something they never expected. I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the quiet, confident smile of a man who had spent 40 years auditing the complex finances of Fortune 500 companies, a man who knew how to find the hidden flaw in any system. They had presented me with what they thought was a closed loop, a perfect trap. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had shown me their entire strategy. Their confident expressions faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. My reaction was not in their script. "All right," I said, my voice even and steady. My calm seemed to unsettle them more than any outburst would have. "Let's meet at my lawyer's office. David Sterling. Friday, 10 a.m. We can discuss the details then." I stood there on the patio for a long time after the silver sedan disappeared down the driveway. The silence it left behind was louder than the engine's roar. The air, which had smelled of roses and damp earth just an hour ago, now felt thin and sterile. I looked at the glass table where Amelia's folder had rested, a ghost of a threat still imprinted on the polished surface. They had come into my home, the home I built with Caroline, and tried to turn it into a cage. They had used my love as a weakness and my age as a weapon. I walked back inside, the house feeling unnervingly vast and empty. Every familiar object seemed to watch me. The grandfather clock in the hall, a wedding gift from Caroline's parents, ticked on, each second a steady, measured beat in the new, cold reality. I passed the living room and saw the photograph on the mantelpiece. It was of Caroline and me, taken on the day we'd finished building the deck, our faces flushed with sun and pride. The Hindus, a much younger Daniel, maybe 10 years old, was grinning, a smudge of dirt on his cheek. For a moment, a wave of pure grief washed over me, so powerful it almost buckled my knees. It wasn't just grief for my wife. It was grief for the son I thought I had, the family I thought we were. But grief is a luxury. It's a warm blanket for a cold night. What I was feeling now was different. It was cold, hard, and clear, like a sheet of ice forming over a deep lake. I walked into my study, the one room in the house that was entirely mine. It was paneled in dark cherry wood, lined with books on history and finance. This was where I had managed our family's finances for 50 years, turning a modest salary into a small fortune through careful, patient investment. It was where I'd taught Daniel how to do his taxes, how to balance a checkbook. It was a room of logic, of cause and effect. I sat down in my worn leather chair, the one that still held the faint scent of Caroline's perfume from the throw blanket she kept on it. I didn't hesitate. I didn't wring my hands. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. David Sterling. The voice on the other end was familiar, steady, a voice that had been my counsel and my friend for 40 years. "David," I said. "It's Robert. Robert, good to hear from you. How are Theraces?" he asked, his tone warm and easy. "The roses are fine," I said, "but the sun is not." The warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by the sharp focus of a lawyer. "What happened?" I recounted the entire visit, my voice a monotone, reporting the facts as if I were delivering an audit report. I told him about their unannounced arrival, Amelia's talk of asset optimization, Daniel's pseudo-medical concern about my cognitive latency. I told him about the ultimatum, the quitclaim deed or the conservatorship. When I finished, the silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Then came the explosion. That ungrateful, arrogant little, "He did what? After everything you've done for him? A conservatorship?" I will tear that woman apart on the stand, Robert. I will make her regret ever passing the bar exam. We'll fight this. We'll get to our own doctors. We'll get character witnesses. This is an outrage. An absolute... "David," I said, my voice cutting through his righteous anger. It was the same tone I used in boardrooms when emotions were running high and facts were being ignored. He stopped mid-rant. "Stop. I appreciate the fire, my friend. I truly do. But right now, I don't need you to get angry." I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle. "I need you to get everything." There was another beat of silence as David shifted gears, the loyal friend stepping back and the shrewd lawyer stepping forward. "Everything?" he asked, his voice now low and focused. "Define everything, Robert." "Start with the education files," I said. "All of them. Do you remember the tuition for Deerfield Academy? The 4 years at Yale for his undergrad? Pull the records for all of it. I want a number." "I remember," David said quietly. Caroline was so proud. "She was," I agreed, a lump forming in my throat. I swallowed it down. This was not the time for sentiment. "Then I want the records for the down payment on his first condo in Beacon Hill. The 20% I gave him as a gift after he graduated. The one he sold 2 years later, for double the price, right before he met Amelia." "I have it," David confirmed. "It was a substantial gift." "It was," I said. "But there's one file in particular I need you to find. It's from the fall of 2005. It should be labeled DG Educational Loan." I could almost hear David frowning over the phone. "The med school tuition? Robert, I thought you paid for that outright. You told me it was a gift to give the boy a clean start." I leaned back in my chair, looking at the ceiling. "That's what I told Daniel. That's what I let him believe. But it was never a gift, David. You and I know the truth. We drew up the papers together, remember? An official intrafamily loan agreement for $350,000. We set a modest interest rate, 4%, compounding annually. You notarized it yourself. It was ironclad." The line was silent as the implications of what I was saying sank in. I had heard the shock in David's voice. "My God, Robert," he finally breathed. "I had forgotten. You never once mentioned it again. You just let it go." I let him forget. I corrected gently. I told him he could start paying it back in small increments once he was established as a surgeon. He got established. He started making $500,000 a year. Then $750,000, but the payments never came. I never asked. I thought his success was payment enough. I thought my son's happiness was my return on investment. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. It appears miscalculated the terms of that happiness. "What do you want me to do?" David Askad, his voice now ablade. "I want you to run the numbers," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "Calculate the total principal and accrued interest on that loan over the last 20 years. I want a precise, legally indefensible number down to the last cent. Then I want you to compile a complete financial history of every significant monetary gift I have ever given him, from his first car to that loan for his first practice that was also forgotten." "Consider it done," David said. "What's the next step?" "The next step," I said, looking out the window as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, "is to find me the best private investigator you know. Someone quiet, professional, and invisible. I have a strong suspicion that my son and his wife will be having a celebratory dinner tonight at a very expensive restaurant. They believe they've won. I would like to know what exactly they are toasting to." A grim understanding settled in David's voice. "I know just the person. Robert, be careful." "Oh, I'm not the one who needs to be careful anymore, David," I said, and a strange sense of peace washed over me. The grief was gone. The anger was gone. All that remained was the cold, clean certainty of the numbers. The audit has begun. After I hung up with David, I sat in the darkness of my study for a long time, the only light coming from the moon casting a silver glow on the hardwood floor. The house was quiet, but my mind was not. It was alive, humming with a familiar energy I hadn't felt in years. The quiet fury had settled into a cold, clear purpose. The grief had been filed away. The auditor was back at his desk. I stood and walked not to my bedroom, but to the door that led to the basement. It creaked, as it always did, a sound that Caroline used to say was the house groaning in its sleep. I flipped on the single bare bulb at the top of the stairs, illuminating the steep wooden steps that led down into the earth beneath our lives. The air that rose up to meet me was cool and dry, smelling of old paper, cedar, and thyme. Downstairs, it wasn't a typical basement full of forgotten Christmas decorations and rusted tools. This was my real office. After I retired, I'd moved my professional life down here, unable to completely let go of the order and logic that had defined me. It was my sanctuary of numbers, a place where everything had a column, a ledger, a reason. And in the center of the room, like a steel monolith, stood a row of four-drawer filing cabinets, fireproof, locked. I pulled a small, unassuming key from the secret compartment in my old desk drawer and walked over to the first cabinet. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. This cabinet wasn't for tax returns or household warranties. This was the archive, the unofficial, unspoken financial history of the Graham family. I slid open the top drawer. The hanging files moved with a soft whisper, each tab perfectly typed, perfectly aligned. I wasn't a father looking through old memories. I was an investigator opening a cold case file, the case of my son. My fingers, steady and sure, moved past tabs labeled First Bicycle, 1985, Summer Camp, 1992, and stopped at a thick folder marked Daniel Graham, Higher Education. I pulled it out and placed it on the large wooden table I used as a workspace. Under the harsh glare of the overhead light, I opened it. It was all there, a meticulous record of sacrifice and investment. Receipts for tuition checks to Yale that had made my hands shake to write. Bank statements showing massive withdrawals from our retirement savings. But I wasn't looking at those. I was looking for the document David and I had spoken about. Tucked in the very back, in a sealed manila envelope, was the promissory note. Intrafamily Educational Loan Agreement. $350,000. The signatures at the bottom were clear. Mine, strong and confident. David's, the flourish of a seasoned lawyer. And Daniel's. His was a quick, almost careless scrawl, the signature of a young man on his way to a brilliant future, signing a piece of paper his father had assured him was just a formality. I ran my thumb over his name, formality. I had made a terrible mistake in judgment, allowing him to believe that. It was a mistake I was now going to correct. But this was only the beginning. The loan was the foundation, the cornerstone in my case. Now I needed to build the structure around it. For the next several hours, I worked. I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel old. I felt a clarity of purpose that was like a jolt off adrenaline. I logged onto my old desktop computer, the one with the oversized monitor. The hum of the machine was a comforting sound. It still paid for premium access to the top financial databases and credit reporting agencies. A professional expense I never had the heart to cancel. It felt good to be using them again. I started with a simple credit search on Daniel and Amelia Graham. The results began to paint a picture. A very different picture from the one they presented to the world. I saw the mortgage in their luxury penthouse in Boston's Seaport District, an obscene number that made my eyes widen. I saw the loan for his Mercedes, the loan for her Tesla. I saw at least 6 high-limit credit cards, and the balances on every single one of them were staggering, pushed right to their limits. They weren't just living comfortably, they were living on a knife's edge of debt. I cross-referenced their address with public property records, and there it was, the first major crack in their facade. A second mortgage. They had taken out a home equity line of credit 6 months ago for the maximum allowable amount. It was a classic move of the financially desperate. Borrowing against an asset to pay for a lifestyle that asset was supposed to represent. They were drowning. I dug deeper. I remembered Amelia mentioning a tech startup she had invested in at a family dinner a few years ago, speaking about it with the casual arrogance of someone who believes they can't lose. It took me less than 30 minutes of searching through business news archives to find it. The company had gone bankrupt 18 months later, taking all its investors' money with it. I found a list of primary investors. Her name was on it. The amount was significant, a 6-figure loss. Then I turned my attention to Daniel. I searched for his name for his surgical practice. He was indeed successful, highly rated, but I noticed something odd. He wasn't a partner at a major Boston hospital, as I had believed. He was listed as a consulting surgeon. It was a subtle difference, but a meaningful one. It meant less stability, no hospital pension, and most importantly, it meant he was responsible for his own malpractice insurance, a colossal expense for a cardiac surgeon. I accessed another database, one that tracks legal filings. I typed in his name, and then I found the second, more damning piece of the puzzle. There was a malpractice lawsuit filed against him 2 years ago. It had been settled out of court, quietly, but settlements are not cheap. And insurance premiums after a settlement go up? Way up. I sat back in my chair, the pieces clicking into place. The expensive condo, the luxury cars, the failed investments, the lawsuit. It wasn't a picture of success. It was a portrait of desperation. They had built a beautiful, glittering cage of wealth, and now the walls were closing in. The monthly payments on their lifestyle must have been astronomical. His income was high, but not high enough to sustain this kind of hemorrhage, and then I understood. Their visit today, the ultimatum, the ugly talk of conservatorship. It wasn't a power play born from greed. Not entirely. It was a move born from sheer, unadulterated panic. They weren't trying to get richer. They were trying to stop from going bankrupt. My house, my $3.8 million fully paid-for debt-free house, wasn't a bonus for them. It wasn't an inheritance they were trying to get early. It was their only lifeboat, and they were willing to drown me to get to it. I printed every document. The credit reports, the mortgage records, the articles about the failed startup, the court filing for the malpractice suit. I stacked them neatly on the table. It was no longer a collection of papers. It was a weapon, a precise, undeniable, factual weapon. I was no longer just a father betrayed. I was an auditor who had just uncovered a massive, multifaceted fraud, and the perpetrators were my own son and his wife. I picked up the stack of papers. They felt heavy in my hands, heavy with the weight of 20 years of lies, of expectations, of a love that had been twisted into a financial instrument. I walked back up the stairs, leaving the light in the basement. I didn't need the darkness anymore. Everything was now perfectly, terribly clear. The storm was no longer gathering. Hit washer. And I was its quiet, calculating center. The 5 days leading up to the Friday meeting were the longest of my life. I moved through my house like a ghost, the ticking of the grandfather clock counting down the seconds to a confrontation I had spent my whole life avoiding. On the outside, I was quiet, going through my daily routines. I watered Caroline's roses. I read the morning paper. But on the inside, the auditor was working overtime, cross-referencing every fact, anticipating every move, and preparing the final, unchangeable report. David and I spoke every evening, our conversations brief, coded like two generals planning a campaign on the eve of battle. The pieces were moving. The traps were being set. When Friday morning arrived, I chose my clothes with care. I didn't wear a sharp suit. I wore a pair of comfortable slacks and a slightly faded cashmere sweater, one of Caroline's favorites. I wanted to look soft. I wanted to look tired. I wanted to look like a man who was ready to give up. David picked me up, and we drove to his office in a silence that was heavy with unspoken strategy. David Sterling's law firm was the opposite of everything Daniel and Amelia represented. It was on the second floor of a historic brick building downtown, with floors that creaked and windows that looked out over a canopy of old oak trees. The air smelled of worn leather, old books, and brewing coffee. It was a place of quiet, enduring strength, not of flashy, transient power. We were seated in his conference room, a large mahogany table between us when they arrived. They were 5 minutes early, a power move. They entered the room, not as family, but as a hostile takeover team. Amelia was dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. Daniel wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car, his surgeon's hands clasped confidently in front of him. They radiated an aura of absolute predatory certainty. I slumped in my chair, making myself look smaller. David had his files in front of him, but they were deliberately messy, a stack of papers that looked more like a desperate defense than a planned attack. Amelia didn't wait for David to begin. She sat down, placed her pristine leather briefcase on the table, and took control. Thank you for meeting with us, David. Robert, we appreciate you being reasonable about this. Our goal here is simply to make this transition as smooth and painless as possible for everyone involved. Her voice was smooth, polished, the voice of a lawyer who had crushed bigger opponents than a retired accountant and his small-town lawyer friend. She slid a new, even thicker folder across Thetable. I've taken the liberty of drawing up all the necessary documents. It's a standard quitclaim deed, along with a durable power of attorney for financial matters. It's all boilerplate, really. It just formalizes the support structure Daniel and I will be providing for Robert moving forward. Daniel leaned forward, layering his false sincerity over her legal attack. What Amelia is trying to say, Dad, is that we're doing this because we love you. We lay awake at night thinking about you in that big house all alone. What if you fell down the stairs? What if you had a medical emergency? This isn't about the house, it's about your safety. It's about our peace of mind. David adjusted his glasses, sighing as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. I picked up one of Amelia's documents and squinted at it. My client is perfectly capable of managing his own affairs, Amelia. This house is his primary residence, held in his name for over 40 years. You're asking him to irrevocably alter the title, to surrender a significant portion of his autonomy. He let his voice trail off, playing the part of an outmatched country lawyer perfectly. Amelia's smile was dismissive. It's about protecting the asset for the entire family, David. Surely you can understand the concept of legacy preservation. We're simply ensuring that Robert's legacy is managed responsibly. She looked at me. We're protecting you from yourself, Dad. I stayed silent for a long time as we had rehearsed. I looked out the window at the swaying oak trees, as if I couldn't bear to look at them. I let them fill the silence with more of their rehearsed lines, more of their poison wrapped in the language of care. They spoke about me as if I wasn't there, discussing which rooms they would redecorate first, the new security system they would install. Their arrogance was a tangible thing, a third presence in the room. They believed they had already won. They were just negotiating the terms of surrender. Finally, David turned to me, his face a mask of weary defeat. "Robert," he said gently, "what are your thoughts on this?" I drew in a long, shaky breath. I looked at my hands, clasped on the table. Then I looked up, directly at Daniel. My voice, when I spoke, was soft, tinged with a sadness I didn't have to fake. "I remember the day we brought you home to that house from the hospital, Daniel. You were so small. Your mother, she had the whole nursery painted light blue, with little clouds on the ceiling. She did it herself, even though she was tired. She said she wanted your first dreams to be in the sky." I saw a flicker of something in Daniel's eyes. Irritation? Impatience? He didn't want memories. He wanted a signature. "She loved that house," I continued, my voice growing thicker with emotion. "Every rose bush, every floorboard. She would have wanted you to be happy, to be secure." I looked down at the papers, at the cold, black text that sought to undo everything she and I had built. I let out a long, shuddering sigh, the sound of a man breaking. "You're right. I'm tired. The house it's too much for one person. The memories..." I looked up at them, my eyes moist. "I'll sign the papers." The release of tension in the room was electric. Daniel's shoulders relaxed. Amelia exchanged a micro smile with him, a flash of pure, undisguised victory. She slid the documents and a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen across the mahogany table. "I think you'll see this is for the best, Robert." The pen stopped just before my fingers. I reached for it, my hand trembling slightly. And then, just as my skin was about to touch the cold metal, I pulled my hand back. I looked up, my face a picture of vulnerability and confusion. "But not today." Amelia's smile froze on her face. Her eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, not today? It's a big step," I said, my voice faltering. "There are things in the house. Personal effects? Your mother's letters, her paintings. I need a few days to go through them, to say goodbye to the life we had there. I need to get my affairs in order before this change happens. I can't just sign it all away in a moment." David jumped in, seizing the opportunity I had created. He sounded like a lawyer pleading for a small mercy. "It's a reasonable request, Amelia. A humane request. The man is being asked to sign over his home. All he's asking for is a week. 1 week to prepare himself emotionally and practically. The documents will be the same next Friday as they are today." Amelia's eyes were like chips of ice. Her legal instincts were screaming at her. Delays were dangerous. A week was a lifetime in a negotiation, but Daniel, blinded by his victory, saw this as the final, pathetic plea of a defeated old man. He wanted to appear gracious in his triumph. He placed a hand over hers. "Of course, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We understand completely. It's an emotional time. Take the week. We're not monsters. We'll come by the house next Friday, and we can sign everything then. In the meantime, we can start getting quotes from contractors for the upstairs renovation." Amelia was furious. I could see it in the tight clench of her jaw, but she was outmaneuvered by her husband's ego. She couldn't object without looking like the villain she was. She forced a tight, brittle smile. "Next Friday, then." They stood up, gathered their things, and left the office with the confident strides of conquerors. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, leaving David and me alone in the silent room. We didn't speak for a full minute. I watched the dust motes dance in the shaft of sunlight coming through the window. Then I slowly sat up straight in my chair. The slump in my shoulders disappeared. The weariness in my eyes evaporated, replaced by a focused, diamond-hard glint. David took the messy pile of papers in front of him and, with one smooth motion, squared them into a perfect, orderly stack. He looked at me, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Did they take the bait?" he asked. I picked up the heavy gold pen they had left on the table, feeling its weight in my hand. "Hook, line, and sinker," I said. That very evening, the city of Boston glittered with the cold, hard light of a million ambitions. While I was in my quiet basement, unearthing the truth of the past, my son and his wife were downtown, celebrating their version of the future. They didn't know they were being watched. They didn't know that every word they spoke was being captured, every triumphant laugh recorded for posterity. David had been efficient. The private investigator he hired was a man named Peterson, a former detective with a talent for blending into the background. Peterson was sitting at the bar of a ridiculously expensive steakhouse, a place with dark wood, dim lighting, and waiters who moved like ghosts. He nursed a glass of club soda and looked at his phone, a perfect portrait of a bored businessman waiting for a client. But the phone was not idle. Its microphone was aimed at a corner booth 2 tables away, where Daniel and Amelia were raising their glasses. The first part of the recording Peterson sent me later that night was just the clinking of crystal. Then Amelia's voice, sharp and clear. "To a smooth transition," she said, the words laced with victory. "To finally getting what we deserve, Daniel replied, his voice thick with smug satisfaction. They drank. Peterson noted it was a $90 bottle of champagne. I have to admit, Daniel said, a low chuckle in his voice. The old man almost had me with that performance today. All that nonsense about Mom and painting the nursery. I thought for a second he was actually going to burst into tears. He really is getting soft in his old age. Amelia made a dismissive sound. His emotionalism was a predictable variable, Daniel, an easy one to manipulate. It's what I told you all along. Frame it as a matter of his own safety, appeal to his sentimentality, and he'll fold. He's from a generation that sees compromise as a virtue. He's certainly compromised today, Daniel laughed. A whole week. He needs a whole week to say goodbye to some old letters. I shook his head in disbelief. It's pathetic. Let him have his week, Amelia said, her tone shifting from celebratory to all business. It doesn't change the timeline. The moment his signature is on that quitclaim deed next Friday, I'll have it couriered to the county registry and filed electronically. By Monday afternoon, we will be legal joint tenants on the title. The asset will be secured. And the bank? Daniel asked, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I had lunch with Mark from the private banking division yesterday, Amelia said. Her voice was confident, assured. I told him we were consolidating our family's real estate holdings. He's already prepared the paperwork for a home equity line of credit. With a $3.8 million property as collateral, with no liens against it, the bank is prepared to extend a credit line that will wipe out everything in a single transaction. Everything? Daniel breathed, the relief evident in his voice. The credit cards, the second mortgage on the penthouse, the outstanding loan for your malpractice insurance premium. All of it, gone. Our debt-to-income ratio will be pristine. Our credit scores will soar. She took a delicate sip of her champagne. And we'll be clean. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I could picture him, his mind racing, seeing the escape hatch he so desperately needed. And then? He finally asked. And then we wait, Amelia said. And we play the part of the dutiful children for a year, maybe 18 months, just to avoid any appearance of impropriety. We do a few minor renovations, nothing too expensive, just enough to show we're improving the property. And then we sell. Sell the whole thing. Of course, sell the whole thing, Amelia said, a hint of impatience in her voice. Don't be sentimental now, Daniel. The house is a tool, nothing more. Its value is in its liquidity. With the proceeds from that sale, after capital gains, we'll have more than enough seed money. For the practice, Daniel said, his voice filled with a greedy, boyish excitement. My own practice, the Graham Surgical Institute. No more hospital boards, no more bureaucracy. My name on the building. And for my campaign, Amelia added smoothly. An exploratory committee for a state Senate run requires significant initial funding. Amelia Graham for Senate. It has a certain authority, don't you think? They were quiet again, dreaming of the futures they were building on the ruins of my life. Then Daniel asked the question that sealed their fate. What about Dad? Once the house is sold, what do we do with him? Amelia's voice was utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice of someone arranging a logistical problem, like booking a storage unit. I've already done the preliminary research on that. There are several top-tier assisted living facilities along the North Shore. Places with landscaped gardens, 24-hour nursing staff, planned social activities. I've earmarked one in Marblehead that has excellent reviews. Is that really necessary? Daniel asked. A flicker of something, maybe the last dying ember of a conscience. Daniel, be realistic, Amelia snapped, her voice cutting. We're not going to have him live with us in the city, and we can't have him living on his own. It's a liability. This is the most humane solution. He'll be comfortable. He'll have his meals cooked for him. And most importantly, she said, her voice dropping to a final, chilling word, he'll be supervised. Supervised. A ward. A problem to be managed and contained. The recording captured the sound of their glasses clinking together one last time. To the future, Daniel said. To the future, Amelia echoed. Peterson stopped the recording, paid for his club soda in cash, and walked out into the cool Boston night, leaving my son and his wife to finish their champagne. They were completely oblivious. They had no idea that in their moment of ultimate triumph, they had just given me the one thing I needed most. They had just confessed. And my quiet, patient auditor's report was now complete. The 7 days that followed the meeting at David's office were a masterclass in the art of silence. For Daniel and Amelia, it was a silence that began as a smug, self-satisfied quiet. They had won. The old man was defeated. They spent the weekend browsing online catalogs for kitchen renovations and high-end Italian furniture. By Monday, their silence had shifted to impatience. By Wednesday, it had curdled into a low-grade anxiety. They started calling. First, it was Daniel, his stone casual. Hey, Dad, just checking in. Hope you're doing okay. The call went to voicemail. An hour later, Amelia tried. Her approach was more direct. Robert, it's Amelia. I'm just calling Tosi if you need any help with packing boxes. That call also went to voicemail. They left messages, they sent texts. All of them went unanswered. Their confidence began to fray at the edges. "He's being dramatic," Daniel insisted to Amelia over dinner on Thursday night. I learned this later from Peterson's final report. "He's sulking. He's trying to make us feel guilty. Let him. He'll be ready to sign tomorrow as promised." But Amelia, the lawyer, was not so sure. In her world, silence wasn't an emotional response. It was a strategy. An unanswered call was a red flag. A week of total silence from an opponent you thought you had beaten Wassasiren. She couldn't put her finger on it, but a cold knot of unease was tightening in her stomach. She was right to be worried, because my silence was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a workshop. It was the silence of a man who had a great deal of work to do in a very short time in which to do it. While they were picking out paint colors, I was meeting with a woman named Sarah, a discreet real estate agent David had known for years, who specialized in private, off-market sales of high-value properties. While they were calling me and getting my voicemail, I was on the phone with the president of a national moving and storage company, arranging a logistical operation with military precision. While they were growing anxious, I was sitting in David's office for a second, much different meeting, signing a stack of documents, each signature a firm, decisive stroke of the pen. The house was a hive of quiet, purposeful activity. My plan was not just a thought anymore. It was a series of executed actions, an engine humming silently, waiting for the key to be turned. On Friday morning, the final day, my house was quieter than it had ever been. It was an empty, echoing quiet. I sat in my study, at the desk where I had done my life's work, a single cup of black coffee steaming in my hands. I was calm. I was ready. At precisely 9:30 a.m., my phone buzzed on the polished wood of the desk. A text message from Daniel. The words glowed on the screen, a beacon of his impatience and arrogance. "We're on our way. Them overs are coming at noon." I read the message. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The taste was rich and slightly bitter. I picked up the phone. My thumbs moved slowly, typing a reply. Each word was chosen with the care of an auditor finalizing a report that would change everything. "Everything is ready for you, son. I've left an envelope for you on the mantelpiece. Read it before you unload anything." I hit send. The message disappeared into the ether. The trap was set. The key had been turned. All that was left was for them to walk through the open door and discover the room was not at all what they expected. The drive to the house was filled with a tense, triumphant energy. Daniel tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, a rhythm of impatient victory. Amelia was on her phone, confirming the arrival time of the moving truck with a crisp, efficient tone. They had waited a week, and in their minds, their prize was finally ready to be claimed. They turned onto my street, the familiar canopy of ancient maple trees shading the road. They were talking about the color they planned to paint the master bedroom when Daniel suddenly went silent. His foot slammed on the brake, the expensive sedan lurching to a halt in the middle of the road. Amelia looked up from her phone, an annoyed expression on her face. "What is it, Daniel?" And then she saw it. Planted firmly in the center of my perfectly manicured front lawn was a sign. It wasn't a cheap, flimsy thing. It was a handsome, dark wood sign from a high-end real estate firm, the kind that dealt in quiet, multi-million-dollar properties. And on that sign, in bold, blood-red letters, was a single, impossible word: sold. For a moment, they just stared. The word didn't compute. It was a glitch in their reality, a piece of data that didn't fit their carefully constructed plan. "What is that?" Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. That's not possible." Amelia was the first to react. The lawyer in her took over, searching for a logical explanation. "It's a mistake," she said, her voice tight. "Or it's a bluff. Some pathetic, last-ditch attempt to scare us. He's trying to play games." She opened her car door, her movements stiff with a sudden cold anger. "Let's go. We're sticking to the plan." They walked up the stone path, their confident strides from the previous week gone, replaced by a sense of urgent dread. The house looked the same. The roses were still in bloom, but the sign on the lawn cast a dark shadow over everything. Daniel fumbled with his key, his hand shaking slightly. He finally got it in the lock, turned it, and pushed the heavy oak door open. The echo of the door swinging open was the first thing that hit them. Their footsteps on the marble floor of the foyer, usually muffled by a thick Persian rug, now clicked and echoed through a vast, cavernous space. They stopped dead, their eyes wide with disbelief. The house was empty, completely, utterly empty. The rug was gone. The grandfather clock was gone. The portraits on the wall, the antique console table, the crystal chandelier, all of it had vanished. The air smelled not of lemon polish and old wood, but of industrial cleaning solution and fresh paint. The anonymous scent of a property that has been neutralized, stripped of all personality, all life. They walked slowly into the living room. Sunlight streamed through the huge, bare windows, illuminating a space that was no longer a home, but a hollow architectural shell. The scuff marks where the sofa had been, the faint outline on the wall where Caroline's favorite painting used to hang. It was a crime scene of a life that had been erased, and then they saw it. In the center of the vast, empty room, sitting alone on the cold marble mantelpiece above the fireplace, was a single object, a thick brown manila envelope. My handwriting was on the front, clear and steady. Daniel and Amelia Graham. They approached it like it was a bomb. Amelia, her face a pale mask of fury and confusion, snatched it from the mantelpiece. Her hands trembled as she tore open the flap. Daniel crowded behind her, looking over her shoulder. The first document she pulled out was a sheaf of thick, official-looking papers. At the top, in bold lettering, were the words, "A real estate sale and purchase agreement." Amelia's eyes, trained to scan legal documents in seconds, flew down the page. She saw the property address. She saw the sale price, $3,800,000. She saw the terms all cash, no contingencies. She saw the closing date, the day before, and she saw the buyer, an anonymous trust company she had never heard of. A choked, strangled sound escaped her throat. It's real," she whispered, the papers shaking in her hand. "He sold it. He actually sold it." Daniel grabbed the contract from her, his face ashen. He stared at the signature line, at my familiar, unwavering signature. The house was gone. Their lifeboat, their prize, their future. It had vanished into thin air, but there was more in the envelope. Beneath the sale contract was another document. This one was different. It was a formal legal notice from David Sterling's law firm. Daniel's eyes scanned the first few lines, a look of utter confusion on his face. What is this? DG educational loan? Some kind of joke? Amelia ripped the paper from his hand. Her legal mind understood instantly. She saw the date, 2005. She saw the principal amount, $350,000. And then she saw the meticulously calculated table below it, showing 20 years of 4% compounding interest. Her finger traced along the bottom line, the final terrifying number. "Oh my God," she breathed, all the air leaving her lungs. "It's the med school tuition." It wasn't a gift. It was a loan. She looked at Daniel, her eyes wide with horror. "Daniel, he's calling the loan with interest. We owe him nearly $700,000. The foundation of their world had just collapsed. They hadn't just lost a $3.8 million asset. They had just inherited a debt the size of a mortgage. And still, there was more. The next item was not a legal document. It was a simple, typed transcript. As they read the first few lines, the last traces of color drained from their faces. "Daniel, the old man almost had me with that performance today. All that nonsense about Mom and painting the nursery." "Amelia, his emotionalism was a predictable variable, Daniel. An easy one to manipulate. They were reading their own words. Their smug, celebratory conversation from the steakhouse laid bare in cold, black ink. They read about their plans to take out a line of credit. They read about selling the house in 18 months. They read about Daniel's new practice and Amelia's run for the state senate, and then they read the final, damning lines. Daniel, what about Dad? Once the house is sold, what do we do with him? Amelia, I've already researched some of the top-tier assisted living facilities. He'll be comfortable. And most importantly, he'll be supervised. Shame, hot and absolute, washed over them. They looked at each other, but they weren't husband and wife anymore. They were two co-conspirators, their darkest, most secret thoughts exposed to the light. They had been caught, utterly and completely. The last thing in the envelope was a single, small piece of notepaper. It was my personal stationery, the kind with my initial embossed at the top. On it was a short, handwritten note. "Daniel and Amelia, you wanted the house? I sold it. You wanted to manage my assets. I have protected them. This is not an act of anger. This is a final audit. Good luck with your debts." Robert, that was it. No long emotional diatribe, no accusations, just the cold, clean finality of a ledger being closed. Amelia's hands, the hands of a lawyer who had held the fates of corporations, began to tremble uncontrollably. The papers, the contract, the loan demand, the transcript of her own damning words, slipped from her grasp. They fluttered down, scattering across the clean, empty floor at her feet. She stared at the mess, her perfect, controlled worlds shattered into 1,000 pieces. Daniel stumbled backwards, his legs unable to support him. He bumped into a wall where a family portrait used to hang, then slid down to the floor, collapsing in a heap. He sat there, in the middle of the vast, empty room, surrounded by the echoes of his own greed. He looked at the scattered papers. He looked at his wife, who stood frozen in horror. And he finally understood. He had not been dealing with a tired, sentimental old man. He had been in a battle of wits with a master auditor, a man who had seen the fraud, gathered the evidence, and executed a judgment that was as swift as it was absolute. They had lost. Not just the house. Not just the money. They had lost everything. And the only sound in the enormous, silent room was the sound of my son, a brilliant cardiac surgeon, beginning to weep like a lost and broken child. The air here is different. It's warm, and it tastes of salt and new beginnings. I'm sitting on the balcony of a penthouse apartment in San Diego, a place I chose not for its size, but for the size of its view. The Pacific Ocean stretches out before me, a vast blue canvas of endless possibility. The ghosts of the old house don't live here. The silence here is not an absence. It is a presence. It is peace. My laptop is open on the small table in front of me. On the screen is David Sterling's face, smiling, his familiar office with its creaking floors and oak trees in the background. We're not talking about lawsuits or ultimatums anymore. We're talking about the future. The final paperwork is ready, Robert, he says, holding up a document. The Caroline Graham Scholarship Fund is officially endowed, $3 million. It's one of the largest single donations the university has ever received. I look at his face on the screen, my oldest and truest friend. She would have liked that, I say, my voice steady. She always believed in education, not just as a way to get a job, but as a way to build a soul. It's going to help a lot of deserving young people, David says. It's designated specifically for students in medicine and law who demonstrate financial need and a commitment to public service. I nod, looking out at the endless blue of the ocean. His mother, I say quietly, and I know David understands who I mean. She would have wanted her money to be used to create doctors and lawyers with hearts, not just ones who only know the numbers. We finish our business, and David signs off with a warm goodbye. I close the laptop, and the screen goes dark. I am alone now, but I am not lonely. The rage is gone. The need for victory is gone. They have been replaced by a quiet, settled calm. I have not destroyed my son. I have simply presented him with the bill for his own choices. The audit is complete. The books are balanced. On the table next to my laptop is a small silver frame. It holds my favorite picture of Caroline. She's laughing, her head tilted back, the sun catching the light in her hair. It was taken on this very coast many years ago, on a vacation where we dreamed of one day retiring to the warmth. I pick up my cup of tea, I look at her smiling face, and for the first time in a long, long time, I smile back. A real smile. It's the smile of a man who is free. Hammond whose dignity is his own again. The order has been restored. The true legacy has been protected. The game is over, and I have won. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength often lies not in aggression, but in quiet wisdom and meticulous planning. It teaches us that underestimating our elders, viewing them as relics rather than resources, is a grave miscalculation. Greed blinds us to the fact that a lifetime of experience is a formidable weapon. Robert's victory wasn't born from anger, but from the calm, precise application of his skills. Ultimately, the tale shows that the greatest legacy isn't the wealth we hoard, but the dignity we protect and the good we create in the world. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who appreciates that the quietest people often have the most powerful lessons to teach.